My daughter helped me meet my affair at our house, but then the worst case scenario happened. Hello, Reddit. Never really thought I'd be one of those people coming here to talk about my worst mistakes online, but here I am. Ironic, right? I've ruined and destroyed my life, and I did it all with open eyes. My life is in absolute ruins, and it's all my fucking fault. The worst part? My daughter is going down with me, and I can't even begin to explain how much I regret everything. So, let's just call me Sarah. My husband and I have been married for over 15 years. We're both in our late 30s, and we have 2 kids, Zoe, who's 15, and Brad, who's 12. Things were great in the beginning. My husband was that guy, the romantic, thoughtful type. You know, the kind of husband that everyone else is jealous of because he remembers the little things, makes sweet gestures, and always puts the family first. He was good to me. Honestly, more than good. But I guess after 15 years of marriage, something changed. Or maybe it was always going to change, and I just didn't want to admit it. The love starts slipping away after a while, doesn't it? It's like it happens in slow motion. You don't even notice it until one day you wake up and realize you've become more like roommates than partners. There's no passion anymore, no excitement. Everything feels routine. Now, don't get me wrong, he didn't change, I did. And I've spent countless sleepless nights trying to figure out why, but maybe it doesn't even matter anymore. All I know is I started wanting more attention, more excitement, more of something I couldn't even define. And that's where everything started spiraling out of control. Zoe, my daughter, has always been a mommy's girl. She's been attached to me since the day she was born. We've always been incredibly close. She's my supporter, my shadow, and if I'm being honest, that only made what I did even worse. It's not just that she's always supported me, she's trusted me completely. And I've broken that trust in the worst way possible. Brad, on the other hand, has always been more of a daddy's boy. It's funny, everyone used to joke about how perfectly balanced our family was. Zoe was always closer to me, and Brad was closer to my husband. It was like a running joke in our house, like we'd each taken one kid under our wing. I guess that's why it was easier for me to confide in Zoe, to let her in on things I never should have. Things between my husband and me were still fine on the surface, but deep down, I was already drifting away. I didn't want to admit it then, but I can see it now. I guess my husband and I had had our ups and downs like any couple, but lately it had been more downs. The love was slipping away. We weren't fighting exactly. There wasn't any big dramatic moment where things fell apart. It was more like we were just drifting. We were more like roommates than partners. We barely talked, and when we did, it was about the usual boring things. Who was picking up the kids, what groceries we needed, stuff like that. We rarely touched anymore. And when we did, it felt forced, like we were going through the motions because that's what married people are supposed to do, right? I'm not proud of what I did. To be honest, I'm ashamed. But if you're going to read this, I owe it to you to be brutally honest. I hated how monotonous our routine had become. I hated how boring my life felt. I hated everything, and it got to a point where I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I wasn't just unhappy, I was resentful. I resented my husband for not noticing how miserable I was. I resented the life we had built, even though it was supposed to be everything I ever wanted. And that's when I met him. Let's just call him Ryan. He was everything my husband wasn't. He was exciting, spontaneous, and interested in me in a way that my husband hadn't been in years. He saw me as me, not just as a wife or a mother. When we talked, it wasn't about the kids or the bills or our boring routine. He asked me about my dreams, my thoughts, my life. He made me feel like I mattered again. It started small. It always does, right? Just casual conversations after work. Ryan and I met at work, and at first it was harmless. We'd talk about the day, complain about our jobs, laugh about something stupid one of our coworkers did. But then, one day, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. I said yes. I mean, it was just coffee, what's the harm in that? But that coffee turned into something else. We'd sit for hours talking about everything. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I wasn't trapped in this dull, suffocating routine that had become my life. With Ryan, I felt free. And it wasn't just that he was listening to me, he understood me. He made me feel alive again, like there was still something left in me that wasn't tied to being a wife or a mother. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was already slipping away from my husband, from my family, from everything that used to matter to me. It was subtle at first, an extra coffee here, a longer conversation there, but it grew. And the more I saw Ryan, the more I wanted to be with him. I knew it was wrong. God, did I know. But I couldn't stop. Ryan made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Wanted. And when you've gone so long without feeling wanted, without feeling seen, you start justifying things. You tell yourself you deserve it, that it's harmless, that no one's getting hurt. But that's a lie. Someone always gets hurt. I knew it was wrong. But like I said before, when you've been starved for attention for so long, you start justifying things. You tell yourself that you deserve it, that it's just a fling, that it's nothing serious. You convince yourself that you can stop whenever you want. It's harmless, right? But of course, none of that was true. Ryan and I started seeing each other more often, and our relationship deepened and escalated faster than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, I was in way too deep. We weren't just having some casual thing on the side. We were in a full-blown affair, and as much as I hate to admit it, my life started to change, and at least in the beginning, it changed for the better. Well, at least that's what I thought. I was happier. I wasn't stuck in the same boring, monotonous routine anymore. I wasn't just a wife who cooked dinner, cleaned up after the kids, and made sure everything ran smoothly. I had an exciting life again. There was this rush that came with sneaking around, with having this whole secret world with Ryan. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And with that came the distancing. I became even more disconnected from my husband. It wasn't intentional at first, but soon it was like I barely cared about him anymore. He didn't excite me. He didn't make me feel wanted. He didn't make me feel anything, really. In my head, I was already checked out of our marriage. Every day I spent with Ryan only pushed me further away. I couldn't even be bothered to care about my husband's efforts anymore, despite the fact that he had always been so good to me. He didn't deserve this, but I was too wrapped up in my own world to see that. I won't lie, I immensely enjoyed my affair with Ryan. Every moment felt like an escape, a reprieve from the suffocating monotony of my life. I was loving every second of it. I felt like a different person when I was with him, and honestly, I didn't want it to end. But then, as if a switch had flipped, my husband suddenly became more present. He started working fewer hours and spending more time at home. He even started talking about working on repainting the house together. Just little home projects, things to do as a couple. He'd noticed how distant I had become over the past few months, or really over the past few years, and he wanted to fix things. He wanted to work on us. He'd see me sitting at the kitchen table lost in thought, and he'd try to reach out. He'd ask how I was doing, if there was anything bothering me, if we needed to talk. But I was already so far gone. By then, I didn't want to fix things. I didn't want to have deep conversations or work on our marriage. I was too engrossed in Ryan, too wrapped up in the excitement of this new life I was living. My husband's attempts to reconnect only felt like distractions, like he was trying to pull me away from the one thing that was making me happy. Every time he tried to bring up fixing our relationship, I shut him down. I wasn't interested. I didn't care. I was already emotionally checked out, and I rebuffed and refused him every step of the way. He'd ask me to spend more time with him, and I'd make up an excuse. He'd suggest a date night, and I'd brush it off like it didn't matter. I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just a numbness toward him and everything we'd built together. It's like I couldn't even see the man who had been there for me for all these years. He was just there, existing in the background while I was caught up in my affair. I didn't want him anymore. And no matter what he did to try and fix things, I had already made up my mind. I was gone. I felt kind of bad, I guess, especially since I knew that my husband still loved me. He was trying every step of the way to reconnect with me, to salvage whatever was left between us. And I could see it in his eyes, in the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. But the truth is, I didn't feel bad enough to reconsider what I was doing. I wasn't sorry enough to stop. The guilt was there, sure, but it wasn't strong enough to overpower how much I enjoyed my time with Ryan. Then my husband told me he had to go on a business trip. He'd be gone for a few days, nothing too long, but long enough. It was the perfect opportunity for me to spend time with Ryan, or so I thought. But of course there was a catch. The kids would still be home. They were on holiday, and both of them being introverts, they rarely left the house. Despite being teenagers, Zoe and Brad were major homebodies. They didn't have many friends and didn't seem interested in going out. Even when I tried to encourage them to socialize, they'd rather stay in and do their own thing. I wanted to see Ryan so badly, but I couldn't just bring him over to the house with the kids home. It would have been too risky. And as much as I wanted to lie and say I was going somewhere else, I couldn't come up with a believable excuse. Most of my family lived out of state, and I wasn't close to my husband's family. My kids knew that, so lying about going to see them would have been suspicious. Plus, I didn't have many friends. Ironically, I guess they inherited that introvert gene from me. Even if I had pretended to visit someone, the kids would have wanted to come with me because they hated being left alone for too long. On top of that, Brad wasn't feeling well. He had been under the weather for a few days, and I knew he'd need me around just in case things got worse. It was a whole mess. I should have just taken it as a sign from the universe, or God, or whatever, that it wasn't the right time to meet with Ryan. Any sensible person would have realized that. But no, not me. I was too far gone. I needed to see him that day, desperately. I spent the entire morning pacing around trying to think of ways to make it work. How could I get Ryan to the house without the kids seeing him? Could I sneak him in somehow? It was driving me crazy. Zoe noticed me pacing and lost in thought, and of course she got worried. She came over asking me what was wrong, if everything was okay. And that's where I really screwed up. Instead of just brushing it off or coming up with some half-decent lie, I decided to confide in her. Stupid, I know. But in that moment, I felt like I had no other option. I told her there was a friend of mine that I wanted to see, and that I didn't want Brad to see him, because I didn't want him getting the wrong idea. Zoe, being the sweet, loyal daughter she's always been, immediately offered to help. She asked if my friend could come over to the house, and when I said yes, she promised to keep Brad occupied upstairs. That way he wouldn't see anything and wouldn't ask questions. I could hardly believe it. My own daughter was on board with this. It was like everything was falling into place. So I invited Ryan over. He showed up in less than 30 minutes. I was excited, giddy even, but the moment Ryan walked through the door, I saw the look on Zoe's face. She wasn't stupid. From the way she looked at him and then at me, I could tell she had figured it out. She knew we were more than just friends. Zoe pulled me aside and in a low voice asked if I was cheating on her dad. My heart stopped for a second, but I tried to deny it. I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, especially not to my own daughter. But Zoe wasn't having it. She told me not to lie and promised she wouldn't say anything. Then, to my surprise, she told me she liked Ryan. She said she had noticed how much happier I had been recently, and that if Ryan was the reason for that, then she thought it was a good thing. She said it so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Zoe then offered to help me even more. She promised she'd keep Brad busy upstairs, taking care of him since he wasn't feeling well. She would make sure he didn't come downstairs and see Ryan. After all, Brad was a daddy's boy. If he saw Ryan, he'd definitely tell my husband, no questions asked. Zoe understood that, and she was on board with helping me cover it up. I couldn't believe it. I was so relieved, so thankful, that I didn't even stop to think about how messed up the whole situation was. Ryan and I had moved to the bedroom, spent the afternoon together, and everything seemed like it was going according to plan. Zoe was upstairs, keeping Brad busy, and for that brief moment, it all felt perfect. But now, looking back, I realize how deeply wrong, how completely fucked up it all was. I had involved my own daughter in this mess, pulled her into my lies, my affair, and of course, if things had gone smoothly, I wouldn't be here, writing this post. No, the worst possible scenario played out, worse than anything I could have imagined. My husband wasn't supposed to come home until the next day. That was part of the reason I'd felt so desperate to see Ryan that day. There was a window of time where I felt safe, but out of nowhere, I heard his voice downstairs. He was home, early. My heart dropped into my stomach. The first thing I heard was Brad's footsteps, pounding down the stairs like he wasn't even sick anymore. It was as if his illness had miraculously disappeared, and I could hear the excitement in his voice as he called out for his dad. That's when the panic set in. I froze. Ryan and I were still in the bedroom, and there was no time to hide him or come up with any solid plan. I could hear my husband moving around downstairs, probably confused by the extra car in the driveway. I was screwed. I knew Zoe must have been freaking out too. She came upstairs to warn me, knocking frantically on the bedroom door, but we'd locked it. I felt like I was going to throw up. I told Zoe through the door that we'd make up a lie. The only thing I could come up with was to tell my husband that Ryan was a repairman I'd called to check the sink in our bedroom. It was a weak story, but I had nothing else. I was sweating buckets, my mind racing. I glanced at Ryan, and he looked just as panicked as I was. I knew I couldn't hide him because his car was parked outside. There was no escaping that. So I asked him if he knew anything about fixing sinks, if he could at least pretend to be working on something. Maybe, just maybe, we could pull it off. But Ryan didn't have a clue. He wasn't handy at all, and the whole thing was crumbling before my eyes. Still, we had to try. I told him to stand by the sink and pretend like he was fixing it. Then I composed myself as best as I could and went downstairs to greet my husband, trying to act like everything was normal, like I wasn't hiding a secret that could blow up my entire life. The first thing my husband asked was about the car in the driveway. I told him it belonged to the repairman, who was upstairs working on our sink. I lied, saying the water wasn't running properly, and that I'd asked Ryan to take a look at it since he was a coworker who also did repairs on the side. I could see the look of confusion on my husband's face, but he didn't press the issue, not right away. Brad, of course, was totally confused. He hadn't heard anything about a broken sink or a repairman coming over. I could feel my anxiety rising with every word that came out of my mouth. Zoe was standing nearby, wide-eyed, probably hoping that my story would somehow hold up. We all headed upstairs together, Brad clinging to his dad and Zoe trailing behind us. I was praying that nothing would look too out of place when we got to the bedroom, but of course I'd forgotten one crucial detail. The bed was a mess. Both sides of the bed were completely unmade, and it was obvious that two people had been in it. The moment my husband saw it, his face changed. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the suspicion radiating off of him. My mind was spinning. I tried to recover, telling him that Zoe had taken a nap in the bed earlier and had just woken up. But I knew it was a terrible lie. Zoe never napped during the day, and even if she had, only one side of the bed should have been messed up, not both. Zoe wasn't the type to roll around when she slept. She slept almost rigidly and always stuck to a little corner. It was even something we teased her about. I could see my husband's expression harden, and I knew I was losing control of the situation. Then, Brad chimed in, innocently debunking my lie. He said Zoe had been with him in his room the whole day and that she hadn't slept at all. I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely think straight. My husband's expression shifted again. This time, it was darker, more intense. He wasn't just suspicious anymore. He knew. He didn't have to say anything for me to realize that. Without a word, my husband walked over to the bathroom door and opened it. And there stood Ryan, awkwardly pretending to mess with the sink. But the charade was over. It was done. My husband just stared at him, then at me. I could see the betrayal written all over his face. He didn't have to say it. He knew what was going on. He had probably pieced it together the moment he saw the car outside. For a few seconds, everything was silent. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world had stopped, and all I could do was wait for the explosion. But it didn't come. Not then, at least. My husband just stood there, staring at me, his eyes filled with something that wasn't quite rage, but more like deep, painful disbelief. Then, in the calmest voice I've ever heard him use, he turned to Ryan and told him to get out. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just told Ryan to leave. Things only got worse that day. I wish I could say it ended with Ryan leaving, but it didn't. My husband kicked him out, but the real storm came after. The moment Ryan walked out of the door, I felt my world crumbling. I was sweating buckets, on the verge of fainting. I had to sit down on the bed because I just didn't know what else to do. I kept thinking, what now? How do I even begin to fix this? My husband didn't say a word to me at first. Instead, he pulled Brad aside and took him downstairs. The panic that had been building in my chest reached a peak. I was sure he was grilling Brad, asking him everything about what had happened that day. My heart was racing, my thoughts were a blur, and I couldn't stop replaying all the moments where I could have, should have, made a different choice. Zoe stayed with me. Of course she did. She sat beside me, silent, probably just as scared as I was. I felt so sick. I dragged her into this. My daughter, the person I was supposed to protect, was now in the middle of this disaster because of my choices. When my husband came back upstairs, he was calm, too calm. He had left Brad downstairs, and I could hear Brad heading up to his room. My husband looked at Zoe and simply told her to leave the room. She hesitated, probably sensing what was coming, but she obeyed. She didn't go far, though. I knew her well enough to know she was hovering right outside the door. She always had this habit of staying just within earshot, especially during tense moments like this. It wasn't even really an argument. My husband didn't scream or throw things like I'd half expected. Instead, his voice was steady, controlled, which somehow made it so much worse. He told me that he had known I was cheating for a while now, but he needed to catch me in the act. He said that me cheating was bad enough, but what really disgusted him was the fact that I had involved Zoe. That's when I felt like the world was collapsing in on itself. That's also when Zoe, standing right outside the door, spoke up. I could have told her not to, could have stopped her, but I didn't. She said she had helped me willingly, that she had seen how happy I was with Ryan and wanted to support me. She said that it wasn't my fault and that I was happier with Ryan. I wanted to scream, to tell her to stop talking, but the words wouldn't come. She was just trying to protect me, but she didn't realize how much worse she was making everything. My husband's face tightened at her words. He didn't even look at Zoe. He kept his eyes on me. And then, in that calm, cold voice, he told me to leave. He said I needed to pack my bags, pack Zoe's things, and go live with Ryan, the man who supposedly made me happier. That's when the panic hit me full force. I started begging, stumbling over my words, trying to convince him that it was all a mistake, that Ryan was just a repairman, which, looking back now, sounds utterly ridiculous. But my husband wasn't having it. He didn't believe a word I said. He gave me 10 minutes, just 10 minutes to pack up and get out. I was shaking as I threw things into a bag. Zoe was silent, packing her things in disbelief. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had no choice. My husband was calm, yes, but when he got truly angry, it could get really ugly, and I couldn't risk that, especially not with Zoe. I had already destroyed so much for her. I couldn't let things get any worse. We left. I had nowhere to go, no plan, and when I checked my bank account and the money in it was so little, I didn't want to waste it on a few days at a hotel. I checked our joint account and my husband had already cleared it. I was completely cut off. No money, no home, no idea of what to do next. I couldn't afford a hotel, so I ended up calling an old acquaintance. A distant one, honestly, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. I had no choice but to beg them to let me stay for a few days, just until I figured things out. That's where I've been for the past couple of days. Since then, I've been trying, desperately trying, to get in touch with my husband. I've texted, called, left voice messages, even tried emailing him, but he's not interested. He won't even give me the chance to explain or apologize. I get it, he's furious. He has every right to be, but I need to at least try. I need to fix this, for Zoe's sake, for Brad, for all of us. And as for Ryan, he hasn't called me once since that day, not once. He's been avoiding me at work too. I don't know if he's scared or just doesn't care, but he's vanished from my life just as quickly as he came into it. I feel so alone right now. I've lost everything, my home, my marriage, and now, even the man I thought made me happy. I don't know what to do. Reddit, please help me. How do I even begin to fix this? Can I fix this? Should I? What can I do to make things right with my husband and my kids? I'm lost, and I need advice. Update. Wow, I really got judged and bashed badly on here. I came here for advice, not to be insulted even more. Honestly, it stings. I know everything is my fault. I'm not trying to justify my actions, believe me, I get it. I'm the one who messed up everything. But still, can we dial down the judgment a bit? It feels like I'm being kicked while I'm down, and I can only take so much right now. A lot of you also asked for an update. I guess it's ironic. You're bashing me and then asking how things are going. But I do have a bit of an update, so here it goes. First of all, I managed to get in touch with my husband. We had a long conversation that felt like it lasted hours. He was calm, but the pain in his voice was palpable. We talked about everything. About what I did, about the kids, about our marriage. It essentially ended with him saying he couldn't forgive me. I expected that, honestly. I wish things could have been different, but deep down, I knew it was a long shot. If the roles were reversed, I wouldn't be able to forgive him either. So we're headed for a divorce. I've started to process what that means, and it feels surreal. I'm trying to wrap my head around how I got to this point and how my life is about to change in ways I never imagined. I made one request of him during our conversation. I asked if he would allow Zoe to come back to the house and stay there for a while. Thankfully, he agreed to that. I can't express how relieved I am that she won't have to stay in limbo with me, especially with everything going on. Once I leave this acquaintance's home, I'll probably need to stay in a hotel for a bit until I can figure out my next steps. I want to find an apartment for myself, but that means I need to save up for a down payment. The idea of having a roommate isn't appealing to me. I want the kids to be able to visit whenever they want without feeling like they're intruding on someone else's space. But having no roommate means all the bills will fall on me, which is daunting and means I'll have to work even harder. I've already put in requests for overtime at work and started looking for side hustles. I know all of this happened in a short amount of time, but I need to kick things into gear for the sake of my kids. They're my priority, and I want to be able to provide for them, even if it means putting in extra hours and juggling multiple jobs. So, yeah, that's it, I guess. I'm trying to keep my head above water. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. It's been a couple of weeks, and you all keep asking for an update, so here goes. First of all, I got served. Yeah, that's the major update. My husband is moving forward with the divorce, and I'm just wallowing in self-pity. I hate myself for ruining everything, and it feels like, ironically, I love my husband even more now that it's all falling apart. I find myself wanting to work on things, missing him more than I ever thought possible. Secondly, as you all kept asking, I finally got in touch with Ryan. I cornered him during our break, and let me tell you, it was brutal. He basically told me off, saying he didn't want anything to do with me anymore. He said it had just been a fling that got way too serious, and now he was done. It was painful to hear, especially since he was the one who played a part in ruining my marriage. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it still stings. Working together is going to be awkward, because the coworkers have already noticed how different things are. We used to be close, and now it feels like there's this big, uncomfortable elephant in the room whenever we run into each other. Everyone's curious and nosy, but I just try to brush them off and keep my mouth shut. I can't let them know what's going on. On a slightly brighter note, I'm now staying at a hotel. I finally had to leave my acquaintance's home. Honestly, I'm surprised they let me stay for that long. We hadn't talked in ages, and we ended our contact on a not-so-good note, but they really came through for me. I appreciate them more than I can say. Financially, I've been putting my savings together. In a couple of months, I should be able to afford the down payment on a little apartment. I know it definitely won't be a huge place, but it'll be mine, and that feels like a step in the right direction. I've never been good at saving, and it's definitely bitten me in the ass, but I'm learning my lesson. I'm determined to do better moving forward. As for my husband, he now lets me come over to see the kids, which is both a relief and incredibly awkward. Despite our efforts to protect Brad from the fallout, I think he knows something's up. He's resentful of me, very, very resentful actually. It breaks my heart. Zoe too is starting to feel that way. I know she feels like I've ruined things for everyone, and it's maddening because she was the one who helped me in the first place. If she hadn't gotten involved, maybe none of this would have happened. But I can't blame her. She's just a kid, and I know this is all on me. Zoe has confided in me that she really wants to fix things with her dad. She's scared he'll never forgive her, which is heartbreaking. She's only 15, but she's not stupid. She gets it more than I'd like to admit. Meanwhile, it feels like my husband and Brad have grown even closer. I hate that I've put everyone in this position. So, that's it, I guess. I'm just trying to keep my head above water and survive through all of this. I'm sorry I haven't been able to update every single day like some of you want. It's like some of you forget that people have actual lives outside of Reddit. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. I know it's been a while and I apologize for the radio silence. I kept getting a ton of requests for an update, but I really wanted to wait until everything was finalized before sharing. Plus, I've been super busy, stressed, and tired from working overtime, so it's been hard to find the time to sit down and write this out. But I finally have some updates, so let's dive in. First off, I'm finally out of the hotel. I've moved into a little apartment. It's small, but it's mine, and I've been there for a couple of weeks now. It feels good to have my own space again. The best part is that Brad can come over and visit me, although he hasn't been doing that very much, which is really tough. As for the divorce, it's officially finalized. In my state, cheating is a really big deal, and it comes with some serious consequences. I didn't get any early money or spousal support, which honestly stings. We had no debts to split, so that's something, but I was hoping for at least a little bit of financial help during this transition. When it comes to child custody, things got complicated. My husband wanted custody of Brad, but didn't want custody of Zoe, which absolutely broke my heart. I know she's always been closer to me, but she's been desperately trying to fix things with her dad. So when I told her I got custody, she was sad because it felt like a rejection from him. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that her dad didn't want her. I didn't want to crush her spirit any more than it already was, so I just told her the court awarded me custody. So now I have custody of Zoe, and my husband has custody of Brad. Brad is still a kid. He's only 13, and he knows that he can come over whenever he wants. But I think he's still really resentful of me right now. I've been trying to mend things, but he hasn't been coming over much at all. In fact, since I've moved into my new place, he's only visited 3 times. It breaks my heart because I want to fix our relationship, but I just don't know how. If anyone has any ideas or advice on how to bridge that gap, I'm all ears. Zoe, on the other hand, has been visiting her dad a lot. She's trying so hard to fix their relationship, which I totally support, but it's also hard for me to watch her go over there, especially knowing how much her dad didn't want her. She's been vocal about her resentment toward me, and I can see she's starting to understand just how wrong my actions were. Honestly, I've been working a ton of overtime to save more money and get my life back on track. I know I messed up, and it feels like I'm constantly reminded of it. I never saw any of this coming, and it's overwhelming. My life feels like a mess right now, and I'm trying to navigate this new reality as best as I can. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate any advice or support you can offer.